protocols, first of all, let me state from the very beginning, do not represent some type of Jewish conspiracy. They are not anti-Semitic, but what they are, in fact, are the Illuminati's blueprints for the creation of what they call a new world order. The end result is, ladies and gentlemen, we are seeing the birth pains of World War III right now. We see, according to the plans of the Illuminati, as found in the protocols and in their own separate writings and letters, that the Islamic nations are going to be put in a position to where they're going to be fighting against Israel. The end result is they're going to clash like they've never clashed before, and that they'll end up destroying each other. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to our brand new and very informative DVD series called The Secrets of the Illuminati. We are at part 5, which is called The Illuminati's Protocols. Now, what has to be the most controversial document ever to have arisen in the 20th century is known as the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion. This particular document has caused so much controversy. It's caused people to just lie, to create rumors, to just pull their hairs out about. And you can't help but wonder, what is all the fuss about? People are actually creating such a furor over this one document. By the time we get to the end of this series, I'm going to prove to you and demonstrate to you what all this fuss is about and why these documents are very well feared by a lot of people in academia. Because the protocols, first of all, let me state from the very beginning, do not represent some type of Jewish conspiracy. They are not anti-Semitic, but what they are, in fact, are the Illuminati's blueprints for the creation of what they call a new world order. Now, let me give you an example here to begin with. I was invited to a particular convention back in 1995, and I was asked to do a number of presentations. One of the presentations involved the Illuminati's protocols. Now, during this presentation, there was a number of reporters there from different Christian magazines and other magazines and such, as you would expect. One article in particular, I think, will explain to you why so much lying, fear, and other things about the protocols came about. I want you to just follow along as I read to you what this article has to say. I'm not going to read the whole article, just portions of it. It starts off by saying, at a luncheon question and answer panel, I found myself on a podium with a Doc Marquis whose presentation on the Illuminati was filled with a phony history only found among hate mongers. The article goes on to say, Marquis was selling an anti-Semitic forgery called Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, with an extra key to understand the real message behind this book. Nowhere in his presentation did Marquis acknowledge that this book is reviled by thinking people the world over. Further on in this article it reads, "At no time did Doc Marquis seem to understand that he was perpetuating an historical lie on an unsuspecting public." And the last thing to take note of is where the article reports that if you are to be taken seriously as a group, you must stand up to the disinformation performance of the likes of Doc Marquis. Now, as I said before, this article was written by a lady who says she was a Christian. It was written for a Christian magazine. And on the surface, quite honestly, this article could be taken seriously except for one major problem. The reporter who wrote this article was never at my presentation. You see, there was quite a number of people who was at her presentation. And according to everything these people had told me, not only was she not at my presentation, but it was only after I had left did she show up and started her thing. Her thing was to blast the protocols and me out of the waters. How could she honestly be considered an objective journalist if she wasn't even at my presentation to report on what I had said? And the interesting thing is, once you started, if you want to start bashing me and everything like that, at least 50 people had gotten up and they just left. And it was these people who had told me what had happened. So you see, again, we have a clear-cut incident that the protocols are causing a lot of controversy here. There was an article written by Reader's Digest on the protocols, and again, they called it a forgery, that there's no truth to it. And even interesting enough, now Time had put out a magazine. It was called Secret Societies. And on page 28, and let me read just an excerpt of what they had to write this time about the protocols. Page 29, here it is. "I hope the time will come when," Judge Walter Meyer declared in a courtroom in Bernay, Switzerland, "when people everywhere will be astonished to learn that in the year 1935 it was necessary to talk for 17 days about possible authenticity in this incredible nonsense which is called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Sadly, 75 years after that libel trial, this hoax, perhaps the most successfully insidious and destructive forgery in history, continues to feed anti-Semitism around the world." And you know, it's because people do not know what the protocols are really all about. There was another incident, again, another one on the protocols. I had written a book back, it was in the 1990s, somewhere like that. It was called The Illuminati's Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, in which I exposed the protocols for what they really are. Well, it seems that a group of occult people had called up Amazon and had written them on email and various other venues, and basically was creating such a furor over all this and trying to get it removed from Amazon's shelves that Amazon had spoken to my publisher, Dr. Alan Peterson, and said that they were going to be removing it. Well, they couldn't give him a good enough answer because according to the Constitution, everyone has a freedom of speech. And that's why everyone else's material on Amazon was also being sold. They have a right. Such a big furor was being done over this that finally Amazon had put together an independent board to examine my book to see what should be done about it. Well, in the end, I was, along with my book, exonerated into this very day. The book is being sold by Amazon and other places. But the point is, these people are still kicking over so much dust over this particular document. And what I want you to pay close attention to in this article in particular, they use a key phrase that I've heard time and time and time again. It says that this document is reviled by thinking people the world over. So that catchphrase, thinking people, it always tickles you in the back of the mind because everyone wants to be considered as a reasonably intelligent individual. Well, according to these people, if you don't listen to their opinion on the protocols, then you're not a thinking person. You're not one of them. In order to understand the protocols for what they really are, what we are going to have to do is going to have to go back way, way back in history, further before the protocols was even considered, back into an event we will find in the Holy Scriptures. Now, in Ezekiel chapter 28, picking it up in verse 12, it says, "Thou sealest up the sum, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. Thou hast been in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was thy covering, the sardius, topaz, and the diamond, the beryl, the onyx, and the jasper, the sapphire, the emerald, and the carbuncle, and gold. The workmanship of thy tabrets and of thy pipes was prepared in thee in the day that thou wast created. Thou art the anointed cherub that covereth, and I have set thee so. Thou wast upon the holy mountain of God. Thou hast walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire. Thou wast perfect in thy ways from the day that thou hast been created, that thou wast created, till iniquity was found in thee." Now let's just recap this just a little, because it says that Lucifer himself was covered in all types of precious gems. It says the sardius, topaz, diamond, beryl, onyx, jasper, sapphire, emerald, carbuncle, gold, and that he had tabrets and pipes built in him. And these tabrets and pipes were there to make musical sounds as he flew through the heavens of God. So literally speaking, Lucifer was a heavenly version of a laser light show. This guy was brilliant in all physical manner, and you could just see all the lights dancing off him as he flew through the very heavens of God. But in order to understand what was going on with Lucifer, we have to get further into the Word of God to really get down to what was going on here. We turn to Isaiah chapter 14. We come to another event in which God gives us more information about this particular angel known back then as Lucifer. Now picking it up, chapter 14 of Isaiah, verse 12, it says, "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground which didst weaken the nation? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will exalt into heaven. I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High." You see, 5 times from verses 12 to 14, Lucifer says, "I will." Now, pausing it there just for a second, back in Ezekiel chapter 28, it tells us that Lucifer had fallen because he was trafficking in sin. The question is, what was he doing? What kind of sin was going on? And right here, we find out in Isaiah chapter 14, his sin was pride. 5 times Lucifer said, I will. And the end result, and it says right here, I will be like the Most High. Lucifer himself was actually trying to set himself up to where he would be God. Now, the next thing we need to discuss in this introduction, which is really critical to understanding the protocol, is, again, what was Lucifer looking to get out of all this? And we find out from Isaiah chapter 14, eventually he wanted to set himself up as God. Now, at that point, once he had sinned, God had literally ordered Michael and the rest of the angelic realm to cast them out of his presence forever. Once the war is over, God could have just let it sit at that. He didn't have to explain himself to anyone. He was God. Now, in God's infinite foremight, he knew he was going to set up the Garden of Eden. He was going to put Adam and Eve there. Once Adam and Eve had done their thing in the Garden of Eden, well, Satan came along, and sure enough, they sinned. And it proves that God's judgment was a just and right one, because if he just lets this go by unchecked, they were just going to keep sinning and sinning and sinning. And the end result is, once we get to the New Testament, we found out that man's state of existence had fallen so greatly that Satan had become, and as the Bible says, the god of this world. Satan still wants to be God. He still wants to set himself up as God. And when we look at the protocols, we're going to find out, and this may seem strange right now, but we're going to find out that Satan has not changed his game plan. He still wants to be the God of this world. He wants to be the God over mankind. He wants to be God over all creation. Hence, the creation of the protocols. And what we're going to do, we're going to get into the protocols now. We're going to find out if they're forgeries, if they're fantasies, or if the protocols are based on fact. And as I said before, by the time we have finished going through this entire DVD, you're going to find out for yourselves that not only are the protocols the plans for the Illuminati to create their new world order, but these plans themselves fit in perfectly with the goals of Lucifer, which he had established from the very beginning of his days, up to the great war in heaven. By now, ladies and gentlemen, you can see that the protocols of the learned elders of Zion has caused a lot of controversy over the years. What we are going to do next is we're going to examine the facts behind the creation of the protocols and systematically determine whether they are genuine or not. And by doing so, we're also going to be able to determine who really wrote them and what is the history behind the protocols themselves. Now, as I said before, it was in the 20th century that the protocols first came into light. It was a Russian Orthodox Jewish man who was known as Professor Sergei Nilus, who was first given the protocols. Now, the protocols, interesting enough, if the stories are true, was stolen by a cleaning lady in one of her clients' home, a very wealthy mason at the time. She saw the documents and, yeah, she stole them. she handed them over to Professor Sergei Nihilus, who was so shocked by what he had read, and this was back in 1900, that he had just kept them under lock and key for 4 years before in 1905 he finally decided something has to be done, and he had them printed. Now in 1917 they were going to go through a second edition, except the problem was the Russian Revolution had broken out. Now it would be Kerensky himself, who was, I believe, the head of the secret police for Russia at the time, that saw to it that not only was the publishing house burnt down for publishing the protocols, he also made sure that anyone who was caught with a copy of the protocols on themselves or in their homes, they would be shot on sight, no questions asked. And because of what Sergei Nihilus had done, he had him arrested, imprisoned, and tortured. He was later exiled and died in Vladimir back in January 13th, 1929. Kerensky did not want the truth of what was inside the protocols to be found out by anyone, because he himself knew what the protocols generally represented. Now, at the same time, there was a Russian correspondence from England, from His Majesty's Court, that was reporting on the events of the Russian Revolution. That man was Victor Marsden. He was, as I said, the Russian correspondent to the Morning Post of London. He himself could read, write, and speak Russian fluently. As a matter of fact, he married a Russian lady. And he was eventually imprisoned and tortured and put into, it was the St. Peter's prison, I believe, in Russia, because he was one of the few reporters who was reporting the inside truth of what was really going on during the revolution. Eventually, he was released, and it took his wife a full year of just laboring over him, but eventually this shattered man had recovered. His health was perfect, and he was back in action for the Morning Post. In the London Library, he found the only existing copy of the protocols. He took the protocols himself and translated them from the Russian into the English so everyone could see what was really going on. Now, interesting enough, remember, the man had completely recovered, and he was going to go out on the Commonwealth tour, in which the king would tour all those nations under him. Mysteriously, and this is what was reported, mysteriously, he suddenly became ill and just died. It seems anyone who has anything to do with the protocols mysteriously dies. Now, the big question is, who wrote the protocols? Where did they come from? This is critical to understanding what's going on and what is all the fuss about the protocols. Back in 1773, if you folks have been keeping up with this series, I've already covered a man known as Dr. Adam Weishaupt. It was Dr. Adam Weishaupt himself who was approached by Meyer Amschel Bauer, who would later change his last name to Rothschild. Rothschild had approached Dr. Weishaupt and basically told him, we know you have the occult genius and understanding to put all these things together. Me and my friends, we have the financial resources to back it. Basically, you create it, we'll back you up. And that's how in 3 years after 1773, on the exact date of May 1st, 1776, that the Order of the Illuminati had been created. Now, Weishaupt himself was literally one of those rare geniuses you come across. If you're lucky, you get one or two in a lifetime. Now, what had happened? Weishaupt's plan for the Illuminati had been discovered. And it was brought to the attention of a man known as Karl Theodor. Now, Karl Theodor, because he was a duke who was the highest ranking member of nobility in Bavaria, Germany at the time, he was also the presiding elector, or in other words, the highest judge of the land. Now, information about the Illuminati had slowly been trickling into him for years. Eventually, he had enough information to where he could convene a court trial and literally put all of the conspirators on trial. Now, among the information that was brought and given to His Grace, Karl Theodor, was certain coded documents. Here we have just one example of this code. Weishaupt himself, along with a number of his conspirators listed right here, every single member had a different name, a coded name. For instance, Weishaupt had the name of Spartacus, Judge Xavier Zwack was called Cato, Baron Mengenhoff was called Scylla, Professor Westenweider was known as Pythagoras, and so on, all the way down the list. Now, if we just continue to look, we'll find out that, and these are just a couple of examples, that different cities in Germany and other places were also given coded names. This way no one would find out where these coded messages were being sent to. For instance, over here we have Munich was identified as Athens, and Bavaria, its coded name was Greece, Ingolstadt was Eleusis, Austria was Egypt. And Weishaupt himself was even changing the names of the months of the year. He was giving them a coded name. Right here we find out that January was called Dima and February was Bima, so on and so forth. And we take a look over here, we find out that when he had set up the Order of the Illuminati, he also coded the alphabet. Instead of just assigning, mixing up the letters themselves, he assigned them numbers instead, and symbols. You will learn that as you get up in the higher degree of the Illuminati, and, interesting enough, in Masonry, which we've already covered back in the 4th DVD of this series called Magic, Mysticism, and Masonry, you find out that the Masons also have these same codes. And even the numbers have been changed. You see, Weishaupt himself coded everything. And if you're setting up a secret society or some sort of conspiracy, you're just not going to write these things and hand them out for every Tom, Dick, and Harry on the road to read. No, you've got to guarantee that they are coded and written in such a way that only a co-conspirator can understand what is there. And this is what Weishaupt had done. He had coded everything. And it was verified, again, at the court trial, that all these things and so much more was coded by Weishaupt himself. Now, in the protocols themselves, now let's think about this. If this is some sort of Jewish Zionist conspiracy, why would certain things like this be mentioned? We have here Charles Darwin. Okay, Darwin, lived from 1809 to 1882, and he was the one in 1859 who put forth his origin of species by means of natural selection. In other words, the so-called theory of evolution. Now, what in any sane person's mind would Darwinism have to do with Judaism? If this document, as so many people claim, is really a Jewish document, why would the Jewish people have the theory of evolution in it when it is clearly plain they want a theocracy, a rulership under God? That makes no sense at all. And yet, for these so-called thinking people, they want us to believe that the protocols represent nothing but an anti-Semitic conspiracy, or that it's, some type of Zionist conspiracy. It is not. Let's take a look at this person here. This is Karl Marx. He lived from 1818 to 1883. He was a German socialist, a political theorist, revolutionary leader, and he wrote extensively on political economy, philosophy, and he has been credited as the originator of the communist doctrines. Before him, there was another person known as Friedrich Engels. Engels worked extensively with Karl Marx, and there's even to this very day, and I still can't get over this one, and I want you, ladies and gentlemen, to take a good look at this picture right here. This is two statues that's set up in honor of Karl Marx and Engels himself. And what always seems to happen, what really kills me, is people will set up different statues and things to honor criminals like these two. It's absolutely horrific what had come about because of Karl Marx and Engels. However, communism has nothing to do with Judaism. Yet, if you read the protocols, you'll find out how part of the plan of the Illuminati is to create and foment communism throughout different countries in the world. How is that anti-Semitic? How is that representing a Jewish conspiracy then? Guess what? It has nothing, absolutely nothing to do with it. Next one. In the protocols, we're still talking the protocols here. All this is in it, ladies and gentlemen. Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche. He lived from 1844 to 1900, and he was a German philosopher who also emphasized the will of power as the chief motivating force about the individual and society. In other words, man can eventually become superior, he can become the dominating life form, and if he just keeps going on, he eventually can become a superhuman being. Question. What does becoming a superhuman being, and this is just a philosophical perspective now from Nietzsche, he was the one that also coined the phrase, whatever doesn't destroy me makes me stronger. What has Nietzscheism, as it's known as, have to do with Judaism? Nothing. Again, the protocols cannot be part of some type of Jewish Zionist conspiracy because of what is written about Nietzscheism. A human being becoming superior to everyone else, or a superior Superman, is part of the philosophy of the Illuminati, yes, but not part of the belief system of Judaism. Again, there is no way this can be part of a Jewish Zionist conspiracy because it's something else. Communism denies the existence of God. Communism believes in the distribution of the wealth and equally the food and everything else to everyone in that area wherever communism is. You know, it sounds great on the blackboard, ladies and gentlemen, but let's face it, it's never worked in actuality. Nietzscheism, again, believes that man can become a superhuman being, and that as a result, these superhuman beings actually can go on to become a god in and of themselves. Darwinism, again, the theory of evolution, where things just happen. We came from some type of chemical goo and eventually just evolved to where we are now. And what I think that's really funny about all that is, to this very day, it's still just referred to as the theory of evolution. Not the fact, but the theory of evolution. And ladies and gentlemen, I have to say for the records, if you study evolution long enough and hard enough, you're going to find out in the end, it takes more faith to believe in evolution than it does in God. It really does. So, when we look at all these different systems, communism, there's Marxism, we have Nietzscheism, there's also socialism, there's fascism, all these different things, if you read the protocols from beginning to end, you will find in them. And not one of those belief systems has anything to do with Judaism. It has absolutely nothing to do with some type of Jewish conspiracy. Again, let's consider the court trial of the Illuminati. Weishaupt, along with Baron Adolf von Koenig, Westenweider, and so many others, they were put on trial. All the evidence was brought forth. All the coded documents were put before Carl Theodor. All these things had been revealed back then, along with all the information that Weishaupt himself had penned on the protocols. Now the protocols, like any other systematic document, has been added to over the decades. More details, more plans were put into it and added. And among other things, this is what we're going to be looking at. During the court trial, it was proven that those collective pieces that we refer to now as the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, they were in fact the coded minutes of the meetings of the organization of the Illuminati and their future plans for the creation of a new world order and how they were going to take over the monarchies of all of Europe. And it was during the same court trial that the plans of the Illuminati had been discovered. Now, Weishaupt himself was forced to retire and left Germany. His co-conspirators had also left, and a number of them was also imprisoned. So the protocols, along with the Illuminati, had gone underground. No one had heard about the protocols at all for more than 100 years until they fell into the hands of Professor Sergei Nihilus, that Russian Orthodox priest we had spoken about previously. At that point, when he recognized what these plans engendered, that, if you remember, he had them published. And for the first time, these collective documents, if you would, were given a title. And that title that was given was known as the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion. And to this very day, people who do not understand that this collective work is coded, they fall for the plan of the Illuminati and believe, innocently or purposely, that they represent some sort of Jewish Zionist conspiracy, which I have stated they never have. And one last piece of evidence we need to look at when it comes to the protocols is the Word of God Himself. Now, when we look at Deuteronomy chapter 28, verses 1 through 14, God told his children, the nation of Israel, what he would do and how he would bless them so long as they obeyed him. Follow what I'm telling you to do, and all these blessings and such will be upon you. However, when we get from verses 15 through 47, it also tells us what would happen to the nation of Israel if they did not obey God. And the one verse we really need to take a good look at would be right here, verses 32, and right at the very end. This is what it says, especially if they disobeyed him. He said, "And there shall be no might in thine hand." There'd be none. God would break them and punish them for their sins in such a way that they would have absolute no power, no authority, no might, nothing in their hands. So then, how could, if we go by the Word of God now, the protocols of the learned elders of Zion represent some type of Jewish conspiracy? How could that be if God said he would not allow them to have any might in their hands? And when we consider that it's only in the last 50-something years that Israel has become a sovereign nation, and it's only been in the last 50-something years, how could the protocols represent a Jewish Zionist conspiracy, since the protocols came before that and God himself said, "I will make sure you have no might in your hands"? They wouldn't be able to do a thing. They couldn't. So when we look at the protocols, or those documents that we refer to as the protocols now, when we look at them for what they really are, we find out that not only were they coded by Weishaupt, but these were added to as the decades went by. Now, further evidence of this we're going to get into in part 2. We're going to see if what the protocols claim, if they actually came about. In other words, there's a number of plans and things in the protocols that the Illuminati stated that they were going to do. We're going to go into these things right now and see if they really did happen. If they did, then the protocols can't be a forgery or a fake either. They have to be genuine then. They have to be real. This can't be some type of flight of fancy. This has to be genuine. If we can prove any of the plans in the protocols happened. And that's what we're going to get to, ladies and gentlemen, right now as we end here and we get right into part 2. It was a dark and cold evening that night back in February of 1785 when a lone courier was carrying documents that had been sewn into the jacket he had been wearing. Whether by coincidence or divine design, this courier, who we know to be, his name was Lance, was struck by a bolt of lightning and killed. Later on, next day, when the weather had cleared, his body had been found, and the local police, trying to identify who this individual was searching his pockets and everything else, and that's when they came across the minutes of the meetings of the Illuminati as they were in that date, and had passed them over to Duke Karl Theodor, the Elector of Bavaria. Once he had those documents, His Grace was able to convene that trial, which proved that the documents, all of them, had been written by Weishaupt and that they had all been coded. Now, what I'd like to show you right now, ladies and gentlemen, are the codes to understanding what we now call the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion. We start at the top. It says adjutor. Now, whenever you're reading through the protocols themselves, you have to understand adjutor is a word that is used in reference to all the agents of the Illuminati, those people, those puppets working for them. That's what adjutor means. The next one is political. Now, this word does not represent an idea or a certain political group. It represents the entire machinery of politics. In other words, all the machinations. And then, of course, you're going to find, and this is the one thing that tricks everyone, you'll find the word Jew, Jewy, and Jewish. And because of that, they think it's a Jewish Zionist conspiracy. No, Weishaupt was very clever in always being able to push the blame in another direction in case anything was ever discovered. In this case, Jew, Jewy, or Jewish actually mean Illuminati, Illuminists, Illuminism, so on and so forth. That's what it's talking about. Where it says Goyim, this literally refers to what's known as chattel, or human livestock, human slaves. And the last one you need to look at is Zion. Now, this is not referring to a Zionist revolutionary movement. No, this is referring to Zion as a place. Okay? Now, we're going to be referring back and forth to this code as we go throughout this presentation. But for now, let's look at those events that led up to the Great French Revolution and see what it has in common with the Illuminati's goals and the protocols. Now, for those of you who studied this in high school, you know, you might have taken some European history course or something. We find out that it was King Louis the 16th, along with his wife, Queen Marie Antoinette, who supposedly were very harsh and mean rulers. They were so cruel, they were so busy spending money on themselves that they just literally let the people of France starve to death. So, accordingly, in response to all this terror and mean things that they were doing, the peasantry had started an insurrection. They revolted against the king and queen, and they stormed the Bastille. This is, of course, what you were told in history, but this is not necessarily the whole truth of what had gone on. You see, if you read the protocols, it says that the first monarchy that the Illuminati would destroy would be France. And interesting enough, Duke Karl Theodore, remember, he was the one that presided over the Illuminati trial. He was so concerned over what these documents had stated, these plans of the Illuminati. He was so concerned that he had them copied along with his own personal written hand record of his concerns and sent them throughout the rest of the other monarchies in Europe. This is how concerned he was. But no one listened. Not one person was listening, except for Queen Marie Antoinette's sister. You see, her sister had, of course, since she was a member of nobility and ran, obviously, in the highest circles possible, had also been forewarned about the plans for France. She had written back to her sister, Marie Antoinette, and told her of her concern over what the Illuminati's plans were, that they were using French Masonic lodges, and this is in the letters now, that the Illuminati was operating through the Masonic lodges in France to foment this war and revolution in France and to overthrow King Louis the 16th and Marie Antoinette. Her sister, Marie Antoinette, paid little heed and really didn't take the warning seriously. She just basically said, well, I don't think that the situation is as problematic as you make it. I don't think that these plans are really all that they claim to be. Unfortunately for King Louis XIV and his wife, Queen Marie Antoinette, they were so wrong, and it cost them their lives, because first of all, the Bastille had been jumped upon, ransacked and everything. And what was really interesting about this, according to the propaganda going on, that there was hundreds and hundreds of innocent peasants and poor people in the Bastille, and the truth of the matter is there was only 3 or 4 people in the Bastille. That's all that were there. And even then, these weren't long-term people. They were just there for a couple days, and they were going to be released. So that in itself tells me, wait a second, how could these be harsh and cruel rulers if, you know, the prisons that they had established were all but empty? And again, if we go by the protocols now, it calls for the monarchy to be brought down. Now, question, what would any of that have to do with Judaism? What would that have to do with, you know, setting up, you know, a political place, a nation for Israel to live upon? They wanted to go back to their homeland. They certainly weren't interested in France. So again, if we look at the protocols and the codes for what they really are, this can't be some sort of Jewish conspiracy. It has to be Illuminati, because the goals of the Illuminati, in order to create their new world order, if we go by Weishaupt's original plans, he called for the abolition of all ordered governments. He had to get rid of all the monarchies in Europe, and we'll get into this further along. History records how wrong Queen Marie Antoinette was in the matter of the French Revolution. There was an infamous man of historical note known as Count Cagliostro. Now, he was also known in history as Giuseppe Balsamo or Joseph Balsamo, so if you see those names, remember, it is still the same one person, Count Cagliostro. Now, he was a man who was hated by very, very many people. I mean, the greatest lover of all the ages, Casanova, was bitterly jealous of him. Catherine the Great, the Empress of Russia, wanted to personally strangle him. Johann von Goethe, the most revered of all of Germany's writers, was almost driven mad because of his hatred for Cagliostro. King Louis XVI of France wanted him persecuted as a dangerous revolutionary once he found out of his plans. And Queen Marie Antoinette wanted to throw him into the Bastille for life, because she found out it was him that set her up for what's become historically known as the Diamond Necklace Affair. And Pope Pius VI accused him of threatening to destroy the Catholic Church. So you see, we have a lot of very powerful, very high-placed and high-ranked people who just wanted to get rid of this person because of all the intrigues and troubles he was causing. Now, here we find that Cagliostro was not only just a member of Freemasonry, but he was also credited with creating the Egyptian rite of Freemasonry, and this is a representation of that. Now, what's even more interesting, he was also a member of the Illuminati. You see, it was on December 27, 1789, that he was arrested and imprisoned in Castel St. Angelo prison. Now, during his trial, it was revealed that he was not only a Freemason, but also an Illuminist. Count Cagliostro had said at his trial, and this was back, when they had arrested him, that in 1783 he was initiated into the Illuminati and shown a book which said Illuminism was a conspiracy directed against thrones and altars, and that the first blows were to attain France. And he would know because he was directly involved, if you remember, in the diamond necklace affair. And he himself, he knew about, this French Revolution ahead of time because he was passed what were to be eventually called the protocols, but what were the minutes of the meetings at the time. And he was shown the plans. And the French Revolution happened exactly as the Illuminati had showed him, and exactly as he himself became involved in. Now, after his trial, Cagliostro was sentenced to death for his involvement in everything. But it was Pope Pius VI who commuted that sentence and had him sentenced to life instead at the Castel Sant'Angelo. Now, he did attempt to break out of prison once or twice from there, and eventually he was sent to the fortress of San Leo, and he died shortly thereafter. Now, another person who had known about what was going on at the French Revolution at the time would have been Alexander Hamilton, who was the Secretary of the Treasury. He said that Thomas Jefferson helped to foment the French Revolution. And for those of you who's kept up with this DVD series, I had already mentioned that Thomas Jefferson was a member of the Illuminati and that he had a hand in all of these things. Now, there's another person who was known as Alois Hoffmann, who was the editor of the Vienna Journal. He had this to say about the French Revolution when he wrote, "I shall never cease to repeat that the French Revolution has come from Masonry and the Illuminati." Now, these three examples, which was just given, were given about individuals who lived during the time of the French Revolution. And the one thing that solidifies all these testimonies together for me are the protocols. Now, let me show you something, and I want you folks to follow along right here. In the protocols themselves, it says, and I quote, "Remember the French Revolution, to which it was we who gave the name of great. The secrets of its preparations are well known to us, for it was wholly the work of our hands." Yes, the Illuminati themselves had the bragging rights, if you would, for saying, we were the ones who did it all. I love the way they wrote into the protocols, what are known as the protocols now, this little missive. Because it never would have been written there had they known their own works, their own plans would eventually be discovered. And it was also Adolf Hitler who would eventually say that his Nazi movement was the exact counterpart of the French Revolution. In other words, his plans came from the Illuminati's plans, from the protocols, which he himself admitted to, on how he created Nazism. And the interesting thing is, of course, when you read in the protocols, you're going to find out how they had planned on the creation of Nazism. You see, it wasn't Hitler who came up with the term Nazism. It was the Illuminati. It was already written in their plans. Hitler was simply following the plans of his masters as they had laid them out in the protocols. Now, during the French Revolution, the big battle cry was liberty, equality, fraternity. This is a historical fact. We can't argue that. This is written in I don't know how many different books that deal with the French Revolution. Liberty, equality, fraternity. Question is, where did this expression come from? Was this just something of the people, or was there something more to it? Because right here, from the Masonic Encyclopedia, right here, it says liberty, equality, fraternity. This was the motto of the French Freemasons. This was not a catchphrase of the French Revolution that the people came up with. No. Because of the Masonic involvement and key players who are high-ranking Freemasons at that time, they were the ones who started the program of using this motto and spreading it to the people so it would be used as a catchphrase. Again, the signature and involvement of the Masons is obvious when we look at the motto right here that says liberty, equality, fraternity. And on and on and on you will hear this catchphrase whenever insurrections or revolutions are started. They use this catchphrase constantly. And the reason is because it is Masonic in its creation. It's not something that the people of the French Revolution came up. It's strictly Masonic. And it was under the orders of Weishaupt himself that the French Masonic lodges be used to ferment the destruction of the French crown and to create what's now known as the Great French Revolution. And to further emphasize this point, again, of liberty, equality, and fraternity, let's take a look inside the protocols and see what they have to say about it. Following right here, ladies and gentlemen. Far back in ancient times, we were the first to cry among the masses of the people of the world, liberty, equality, fraternity. Words many times repeated since those days by stupid poll parrots who from all sides round flew down upon these baits and with them carried away the well-being of the world, true freedom of the individual, formerly so well guarded against the pressure of the mob. So as you can see, ladies and gentlemen, the phrase liberty, equality, and fraternity is not a creation either of the French Freemasons, but were used as a catchphrase for the French Revolution. In their own writing, again, the Illuminati clearly points out they were the ones who came up with this expression. I think by now we've shown enough, at least with the French Revolution, to prove that what was written in the minutes of the meetings of the Illuminati, historically speaking, had happened exactly as they had planned. They themselves claimed that they had planned for the French Revolution, that they had fomented all the works, and that they themselves now claimed that they were the ones who came up with the expression liberty, equality, fraternity, and in the end they themselves stated that they were the ones who created the Great French Revolution. I think at this point we have to admit, ladies and gentlemen, that the protocols are historically accurate when it comes to the plans of the Illuminati for the French Revolution. Now we're going to get further along into the plans of the Illuminati and see if history agrees with them, and to see if the plans of the Illuminati for their New World Order, if those plans have come true or not. And by comparison to the protocols, I think the answers and the results are really going to truly amaze you. Once the French Revolution had met with such success for the Illuminati, plans were made for the rest of continental Europe. Now, for the next 2 years, things had been going along very smoothly, and would have continued so smoothly for the Illuminati and everything else. But the problem is, in 1830, their leader, Dr. Adam Weishaupt, had died. For 3 years after that, quite literally speaking, the Illuminati was in a standstill. The one genius that had put it all together, the guiding hand, the guiding force, had passed away. So they needed to find someone that was equal to this man's caliber. And as I said, it took 3 years, but eventually they found the man they were looking for. His name, and we've seen this gentleman throughout the series, was Giuseppe Mazzini. Mazzini himself was an Italian revolutionary, and as you recall, back in DVD 1, which was called The Arrival of the Antichrist, we demonstrated, among other things, how he created that group that we call nowadays known as the Mafia. As a revolutionist, Mazzini's mind was geared perfectly towards a world revolutionary movement. Now, he himself had a very interesting friend, and again, we have spoken about this individual before. That personal friend of his was General Albert Pike. And if you remember, it was Albert Pike who became the head of the southern jurisdiction of Freemasonry during the mid-1800s. Now, in a number of correspondence between Pike and Mazzini, they came up with a diabolical plan to create 3 world wars that would literally allow the Illuminati to take over the entire world and set up what, as you well know by now, is called the New World Order. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to show you that part of the letter where they were talking about World War I. And I want you to just read along with me here. Now, according to Mazzini and Pike's correspondence, this is what they said about World War I. And tell me if this doesn't sound very familiar to you. The First World War must be brought about in order to permit the Illuminati to overthrow the power of the Tsars in Russia and of making that country a fortress of atheistic communism. The divergence caused by the agenter, if you remember, that is a coded Illuminati word that's used in the protocols now, which means agents. The divergence caused by the agents of the Illuminati between the British and the Germanic empires will be used to foment this war. At the end of the war, communism will be built and used in order to destroy the other governments and in order to weaken the religions. Okay? Let's face it. It happened exactly as it's stated right here, that World War I would be started because of a disagreement between the German nation and England, and that the end result would be communism would be set up in other countries that would strengthen them while at the same time weakening religions. History proves this had happened. Now, World War II, according to the plans, and I'll ask you to read along with this, and here is what the plans for World War II has to say. The Second World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences between the fascists and the political Zionists. This war must be brought about so that Nazism is destroyed and that the political Zionism be strong enough to institute a sovereign state of Israel and Palestine. During the Second World War, international communism must become strong enough in order to balance Christendom, which would be then restrained and held in check until the time when we would need it for the final social cataclysm. Now, let's look at this carefully. First of all, notice how they said that they're going to pit fascism against political Zionism, okay? Political Zionism started back in the late 1800s and fascism around the same time. Now what's interesting is where it says, among other things, they're going to, of course, bring about something known as Nazism. Now, when Pike and Mazzini were writing these letters back and forth, if you study the protocols, you'll find out that the word Nazism and what they believe in are in the protocols, yet this had not been known by anyone other than the Illuminati until the 1830s, specifically 1933, when Adolf Hitler was coming to power. See, they had already made these plans. These were planned well ahead of time, but something was stopping them from coming about when these letters were first being passed back and forth in the 1870s. I will get into that in a couple minutes. For now, this is what, as I was saying, the plans for World War II was about, and isn't it interesting how, among other things, they wanted, and how could this have happened? How could they have guaranteed that Israel would become a state, a sovereign state? How could they know and plan to such a precise way that this was going to happen? Now, in DVD 6, which is called The Illuminati is Fulfilling Bible Prophecy, I'm going to reveal something so shocking that most people at first probably will not believe it. And it does involve why Israel went back to the Palestine area. How could they just move in and be guaranteed a home? Some great political force was working behind the scenes that was going to guarantee this. But as I said, we will get into this on DVD 6. Now, what were the plans for World War III? And again, if you'll just follow along, and it says, the Third World War must, now remember, this in particular war hasn't happened yet. It's supposed to be happening. And I want you to tell me if some, if not a great majority of this, doesn't sound familiar. The Third World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences caused by the agents of the Illuminati between the political Zionists and the leaders of the Islamic world. The war must be conducted in such a way that Islam, or the modern Muslim Arabic world, and political Zionism, the state of Israel, mutually destroy each other. Meanwhile, the other nations, once more divided on this issue, will be constrained to fight to the point of complete physical, moral, spiritual, and economical exhaustion. We shall unleash the nihilists and the atheists, and we shall provoke a formidable social cataclysm which, in all of its horror, will show clearly to the nations the effect of absolute atheism, origin of savagery, and of the most bloody turmoil. Then everywhere the citizens, obliged to defend themselves against the world minority of revolutionaries, will exterminate those destroyers of civilization, and the multitude, disillusioned with Christianity, whose deistic spirits will from that moment be without compass or direction, anxious for an ideal, but without knowing where to render its adoration, will receive the true light through the universal manifestation of the pure doctrine of Lucifer, brought finally out in public view. This manifestation will result from the general reactionary movement, which will follow the destruction of Christianity and atheism, both conquered and exterminated at the same time. I don't believe that anyone could argue that September 11, 2001, when the World Trade Center was attacked, by those terrorists, that things haven't escalated in the Middle East. Israel and the Islamic world, they're at each other's throats. And if these plans continue the way the first two has, we're in for a hellacious future, and it's not going to be a good one, to say the least. The plans of the Illuminati are very, very succinct, and I think by now you will recognize the exact same writing style and the wording of these three world wars are very similar, if not exact, to those found in the protocols. And in a few minutes we will be going back into the protocols and show you how the Illuminati plans to set up their their new world order. Now, we need to take a look at English history for a bit so you can understand a very important point that needs to be made. Now, during 1837, the King of England was William IV. William IV was considered to be a very good monarch and a good king for his people, but it was on June 20th of 1837 that King William IV of England had died of heart failure. And because he and his wife had no children, the throne of England went to his niece, Victoria. Now, Queen Victoria, in her diary, had written the following excerpt. I was awoke at 6 o'clock by Mama, who told me the Archbishop of Canterbury and Lord Cunningham were here and wished to see me. I got out of bed and went into my sitting room, only in my dressing gown, alone, and saw them. Lord Cunningham then acquainted me that my poor uncle, the king, was no more, and had expired at 12 minutes past 2 this morning, and consequently that I am the queen. It was about a year later, and this is the 1838 newspaper, in which it proclaimed that Queen Victoria had ascended the throne and had gone through the coronation ceremony, which made her the new Queen of England. Great Britain would be ruled by this lady for 63 years and 7 months before she would die of a cerebral hemorrhage in her sleep. And that would have been back in 1901, January 22nd is when she had died. Now, England literally was in a state of shock. It literally seemed impossible that such a proud and noble heart could suddenly stop. Most people, if you're from England, will usually see 2, sometimes, if you're very fortunate, 3 coronations. When Queen Victoria had ruled, most people are alive. This was the only person they knew that had ever been on the throne. One monarch, Queen Victoria, and that was it. But as we were saying, it was in 1901 that Queen Victoria had passed away in her sleep. And it was her son who would become Edward, or King Edward the Seventh, who would take over the throne of England. But Queen Victoria, as I said, her political influence was absolutely phenomenal. Now, at the time of her reign, there was 20 monarchs ruling in Europe, and 18 of those ruling monarchs were related to Queen Victoria either through birth or marriage. Her Majesty had made most of the arrangements of her relatives, and the empire at that time was absolutely immense. Right here is an old map in red which shows the countries that was under the authority of Queen Victoria at the time. Now, it was on January 20th, 1901, when Queen Victoria had passed away, and his eldest son, Edward, would ascend the throne of England. He would become known as Edward VII. Now, his reign lasted for 9 years, and he became known, historically speaking, as Edward the Peacemaker. Edward the Peacemaker, he was named that because he made sure that he had very positive diplomatic relationships in Europe and with America, and he had treaties with all of them. And at the same time, he was related to 9 of the other ruling monarchs of Europe, and that included, William II, who was the Kaiser of Germany, and he was the grandson of Queen Victoria. He was related to the kings of Spain, Denmark, Portugal, Greece, Belgium, Norway. He was also related to the Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria and the Grand Duke Michael Alexandrovich. So you see, England was a powerhouse at this point. This is the one thing that prevented the Illuminati from moving back in the 1870s. Victoria had made sure that literally all of Europe was united and related to her in one way or another. There was only 2 nations that I can recall from that period that was not related to her at the time. So the question is, how do you go up against such a power broker? At that point, they couldn't. But, as the letters just stated, we just saw their plans for World War I, World War II, World War III, that they were going to do this one war at a time. Now, they waited for the right moment. They had to wait till Queen Victoria had passed away, and they had to make sure everything was set right. And this is where it's going to get very, very interesting, because for those of you who may know your British history, it would be King Edward VIII, who abdicated the throne of England. Now, the excuse for the king's abdication was that he wanted to marry a lady from America who was known as Wallis Simpson. Now, Wallis Simpson was an American socialite who had met King Edward VIII while in England. Unfortunately, the British Empire had moved against Edward and Wallis, claiming that he could not marry her because she was a divorcee. And the reasoning was sound on the surface. He was, as king, also the head of the Church of England, which meant that he could not marry her because the Church of England does not recognize and would not allow divorcees to remarry. The official reason is right here, Wallis Simpson, as put by the newspapers. Now, this is not the truth. This is the excuse. You see, if you study and take a look at the life of King Edward VIII closely enough, especially after he abdicated the throne to supposedly marry Wallis Simpson, you will find out Edward himself was an ardent admirer of Hitler, and he himself was a fascist. His political views was that of fascism, and the British government was afraid that if they allowed him to take the throne of England, they would have a fascist nation. Now, the proof of this lies in, among other things, his war record. Remember, World War I was fomented to cause German and American and English treaties and ties to be severed. World War II came about for a number of other reasons, but at the same time, it has been proven and documented, not just in English records, but also in German records, that, among other things, who would have been the future King of England had been passing to the German secret government documents and information. This is known as being a traitor to your own nation. This is what he was doing. He was giving out military secrets, plans, and one particular event I remember off the top of my head was when the Nazis were invading Paris. If it wasn't for the information he had passed to them, it never would have happened. But because he was passing those secrets, Hitler jumped on the opportunity and attacked Paris and took over France. There's a lot of very bad history involving this man who would have become the King of England. This is what history definitely proved to be, the saving grace, if you would, of England, that this man did not become the king, because I have a feeling, had he become the King of England, we would have right now a Nazi state instead of a free England, as it is. Interesting enough, I like the way, even in his abdication address, how he said that he was abdicating the throne because of a woman he loved. He was actually forced out of, if you would, office. They gave him no choice. He could either keep the throne or renounce it and marry Wallace. He could not have it both ways. Actually, there are a number of ways he could have done it like that. He could have still married Wallace and still remained the King of England, but the British government was too afraid of what he could do to their nation. So, literally, they railroaded him into abdicating the throne. Now, after that, it was his brother, who everyone called Bertie, who became the King of England instead. And it was along with his wife, Elizabeth, and I don't mean the present Elizabeth, I mean his wife, Elizabeth, who in 1937 would be crowned the next King of England. And it was, one thing I really admired most about this particular king is King George VI, or as his family called him, Bertie. He was ill prepared for the job, if you would. His brother had been reared all his life to become the King of England, but King George VI was not prepared at all, and he was terrified. He was positively terrified of becoming the next King of England. As a matter of fact, so badly shaken was he when he found out his brother was going to abdicate the throne that he went to his own mother, Queen Mary, and he cried on her shoulders for almost an hour. He was that horrified, that upset over the fact he was going to become the King of England. He wasn't prepared for this job. He just wasn't. He was now going to become the actual head of the most powerful nation that's ever existed. And the thought just absolutely terrified him. Now, it was said that because of his wife, Queen Elizabeth, and she was a lovely young lady, but it was said that it was because of his wife that he was able to stand up in public, carry on his duties, and perform his role as the King of England. And knowing the Queen Mother, as well as history records and tells us of her, I have no doubt of it. Now, sadly enough, it was during King George's time that World War II had happened. And among other things, as the plans between the Illuminati and the Masons through Albert Pike, that Israel did become a sovereign nation back in 1948. What had happened, among other things, was that England and America at the same time had betrayed Israel to a future doom. They had betrayed her. England and America was the two most powerful nations that had protected the rights of Israel and her people. But now they were going to literally hand them over to an uncertain future. And World War III, which I am convinced is going to come upon us soon, does plan once again for Israel to come under attack, and this time by one of her most ancient people, of course, those Islamic nations. The outcome of all this is at this point uncertain. But one thing I am certain of, World War I had happened exactly according to the protocols and the plans of Mazzini and Pike. World War II had happened the same way. World War III, we already see the preambles of it coming about. I am convinced World War III, according to the plans of the Illuminati, are going to happen. Now, one thing, before I go on to this next section, according to the protocols, they also stated that they would cause the Russian aristocracy to collapse, and that they would also set up communism in Russia. If you just read through the protocols, it becomes so obvious what they're doing. Let me just read a couple of excerpts just from the protocols. I've got time restraints here, but I just want to take a couple of moments to read these. It says, and this is about Russia, the principal guarantee of stability of rule is to confirm the aureole of power. And this aureole is attained only by such a majestic inflexibility of might as shall carry on its face the emblems of inviolability from the mystical causes. Such was, until recent times, the Russian autocracy, the one and only serious foe we had in the world. Now, once the Illuminati were able to get the mobs and masses of the people of Russia to believe that they were trodden down slaves to a cruel and heartless ruler, and that would have been Tsar Nicholas II, here's what the end results were. By want and envy and hatred which it engenders, we shall move the mobs, and with their hands we shall wipe out all those who hinder us on our way. And what happens after that? Again, from the protocols. We appear on the scene as alleged saviors of the worker from this oppression when we propose to him to enter the ranks of our fighting forces. And here's their fighting forces: socialists, anarchists, communists, to whom we always give support in accordance with an alleged brotherly rule. So you see, it became necessary for the Illuminati, when they devised their three world wars, that they were going to have to wait. They were going to have to wait till Queen Victoria's rule had come to an end. They were going to have to wait for the right moment when they could kick off World War I, and then they made a deal with King Edward VIII, who supposedly abdicated to marry Wallis Simpson. They made a deal with him that when World War II ends, should we take over England, we're going to put you on the throne. All these things conclusively prove, especially since all of this is from the protocols, that the documents, historically speaking, are not forgeries. Things happen exactly as they stated they would. The overthrow of Russia, the overthrow of the French Revolution was part of these plans. It came about as they stated it would. World War I, World War II, and now we are facing World War III, I believe, in only a number of years. How close is that? I can't predict. The end result is, ladies and gentlemen, we are seeing the birth pains of World War III right now. We see, according to the plans of the Illuminati, as found in the protocols and in their own separate writings and letters, that the Islamic nations are going to be put in a position to where they're going to be fighting against Israel. The end result is they're going to clash like they've never clashed before, and that they'll end up destroying each other. And that in the interim, with all the smoke and fire going, they're going to destroy Christianity at the same time. And they're going to set up their own nation, their own new world order, to where they're going to put their own world leader on it. And according to their own writings, they call this coming ruler of theirs the king of the despots. It would make sense because if you're a member of the Illuminati, well, you don't refer to him as the Antichrist. That's a Christian term, and they don't believe in the Bible. They refer to this coming person as the king of the despots. And with that in mind, we're going to end it here and we're going to get right into the Illuminati's 7-part plan for global conquest.